Well, let's get to our first conversation now. The presidential team has hailed President Bola Tinubu's economic reforms after Nigeria surpassed its 2025 inflation target. The latest data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows that headline inflation fell to 14.45% in November 2025, down from 16.05% in October, marking the 8th consecutive month of decline. They described the figures as proof of impact of tough, radical reforms and disciplined economic management. In January, President Bola Tinubu set a 15% inflation target. Many doubted it. Today, facts have answered them. Headline inflation eased to 14.45%, according to the NBS in November 2025, surpassing the target and falling from 16.05% in October. The recent decline in inflation, according to the presidency, signals that the government policies were making tangible progress towards stabilizing the economy and easing the cost of living for Nigerians. My guest is Mr. Sunday Dari. He's a special advisor to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on media and public relations. He joins me live from our Abuja studios for this conversation. Good afternoon, Mr. Dari. It's good to have you join us for this conversation today.
Good afternoon, Tolu. And how are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for being with us. I think it's good to start with the projection, just like I read in my introduction. Projected 15%. Now we are at 14.45%. Despite all odds, Nigeria is still standing tall. Now, I'd like you to put us through what you think are the fundamentals that took us to this level. How did we get here? What are those things that were really done right, and what should we still be doing to continue with this trend?
Thank you very much. You recall that about a year ago when President Bola Ahmed Tinubu addressed the Joint National Assembly and read the budget for 2025, he mentioned that we was going to bring down inflation to about 15%. And at that presentation, he gave a prescription, strictly that we are going to have fundamental changes, hard structural changes of the economy, marrying both fiscal and monetary policies, macroeconomic efforts. What we have seen in the last 11 or 12 months is an effort to make sure that the Nigerian economy is retooled. So at this point, the inflation figures we're seeing, we're at an inflection right now, which is the first dividend of hard structural reforms on the part of this administration. And I think more importantly, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has emphasized working less with administrative controls and given flight and breadth to market controls, competition, and the tenets of 21st century capitalist economy. And that's the result we're seeing through the inflation that is easing down. We're seeing the flow of investments coming in. We're seeing expansion in agro-allied, in digital, and critical sectors of the economy.
I must say, stability even in the foreign exchange market is something that Nigerians, analysts have commended. But let's talk about the handshake now between the Central Bank of Nigeria and also the Ministry of Finance, which is something that is very, very important. How would you rate that handshake, the synergy between both parties to help us achieve inclusive growth, particularly at this time?
I think what we've seen in the past is a dislocation, a disorientation between the fiscal and monetary sectors of our economy. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was deliberate in bringing the two people he brought to head these two units, and we have seen them build up a synergy. At first, it seemed as if they were wobbling, but very clearly, they were applying the prescription necessary, and the result of that is the recovery that we're seeing. That's one. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, on his own part, was deliberate in sequencing the reforms of the Nigerian economy. And how did that calibration take place? The first was making sure that we needed to have stability. And that was the charge he gave both the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Economy and also the Central Bank Governor. So we've seen stability coming. You talk about the forex stability and other stability. After that, you will see we saw the unleashing of key reforms in key sectors that give us the macroeconomic results that we've gotten. Now we're at the point on which we are unlocking growth for this economy and expanding. And that's a result of deliberate sequencing on the part of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So when you have the president with a vision, and you have the fiscal and monetary sectors and those leading them on the same page, singing off the same hymn book, these are the results you get. And what are these results? Beyond the inflation rate that has come down, we're seeing expansion in the economy. We're seeing restored investor confidence. That is critical. We're seeing the agro-allied industry expanding. We're seeing companies like PZ, who were packing their bags to leave the country, now coming back and being very expressive about it to say, because we have seen the reforms, bringing about reforms, they've moved from a negative 10 billion to a positive growth of having profit in their revenue.
Now, many would say that these reforms kind of favor the large entities. It's a narrative in some quarters, and I'd like you to make us understand this, that the micros are being gotten very correctly. That's talking about the micro segment of Nigeria's economy. But the micro is the worry. That's for the man on the street who doesn't even understand what the 14.45% of inflation means to him. All he wants is to see that he can feed, buy whatever he wants, purchasing power being, to the level that he wants it to be. So what do you think? What are the plans? Because I've asked this question, or I almost ask it every time. What are the plans to address the fallout of some of these policies on Nigerians?
I think the fallout of some of these policies are already being addressed. But let me start. When it comes to reforms, and I've said it very often, that reforms, you don't go from 0 to 100. It's a process, and it takes time. And before you reform or recalibrate an economy, you have to deal with the microeconomic issues. And that's what has been dealt with, at least especially in the last 2 years. Now, in the last 6 to 8 months, first we've seen inflation is down for 8 consecutive months, over 200 base points. That's critical. But beyond that, we've seen micro benefits beginning to come. Oftentimes, you want to draw a line between the inflation rate easing down and the cost of living. Of course, it does not come at tandem. They don't come at the same rate. But what we've seen is the cost of living that was rising sharply before is now rising a bit more slowly, which shows the impact of the inflation coming down. And how best is it to relate to this if we're dealing with Nigerians and the common man? It's from the cost of foodstuff in the market. And we've seen surveys, we've seen newspaper headlines, we've seen economic experts speak to this. The productive capacity of the Nigerian economy has been improved. So you see that prices are coming down. Not all the prices, but very clearly, the key prices of goods that many Nigerians spend a lot of their income on, these prices are coming down. Even as we ease into the Christmas season, these prices are holding very strong. And this is a result of the sequencing I talked about, the macroeconomic efforts, because those macroeconomic efforts are the pillars that can deliver the micro benefits. And we're beginning to see that micro benefits. We're also seeing resources being freed up for education, for agri, for healthcare, for human capital development. It's all coming. So it's a process. We're getting to the stage of the micro right now. We're seeing vulnerable Nigerians being supported by this government, over 8.5 million. We're seeing investments being freed in for healthcare delivery. PhD centers, about 1,500 are being reinvigorated. We're seeing infrastructure coming up across the country. We're seeing deliberate efforts on the part of this administration to invest in capital projects that is necessary for the development of our country.
Now, the president has been bold when it has to do with attracting investment. He's been leading that charge as the chief marketing officer of Nigeria. Obviously, we see that wherever he travels to. I'd like you to bring us up to speed with the level of investment now that we've been able to attract, considering opening up of our economy, foreign currency gaining strength. better than what it used to be, and investors being able to predict, repatriation and all of that. How well are we now driving investments at this time, Mr. Dari?
Let me speak to indicators. As at February, March this year, we had about 2-3 major companies that wanted to leave this country. A few months down the road, Nestle, MTN, all of them stayed back. Even banks declared massive profits. These are financial institutions, manufacturing organizations who are out there in the market making huge investments. Rather than taking their investment out of the country, they stayed back. That's key. And in staying back, beyond what they make within the country, they also bring in investment. We've also seen the solid mineral sector. I was looking at the breakdown in the last 10 months. From 2.6 billion to 5.6 billion, $8.6 billion from the solid minerals industry. Those are investments pouring in from investors because of the recalibration of the economy and what we have seen. So you want to speak to the fact that we have stability. You want to speak to the fact that we have an investment-friendly atmosphere under this government. You want to speak to the fact of the policy of ease of doing business. You want to also speak to the fact that the trips Mr. President has made in the past 2 years have come with FDI promises, commitments, which also takes time. FDI doesn't come in 2 months. It's a process. And I know that the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment is keeping a close tab on that. But you also look at the oil and gas. Look at the critical sectors of our economy. The manufacturing sector has been expanded. The agro-allied sector has been expanded as investors are coming in. Government is also pumping in money. But look at oil and gas. Look at the gas alone. Then look at oil itself. We've gone from a paltry 850 MPD to 1,500. We've been able to meet our OPEC quota in the last several months. So I think what we're seeing is, you cannot really pin it down to Naira and Kobo, but you are seeing a healthy economy. We're seeing a rebound in the economy because of the hard structural reforms that we've had and what we intend to see. Because when you look at projections for 2026, we're going to see the inflation steady. Nigeria is not insulated from the global economic realities. Just 2 days ago, the British inflation rate went up for the second time. It's now at 5.1. In America, the unemployment rate is on the increase. Nigeria is not insulated from these global economic realities, but we are lucky to have a president with a clear vision who, right from the get-go, took those hard decisions and held down the fact that we needed to have these reforms before we can have the growth that is desired for our country.
Now, you touched on a very important sector, oil and gas industry, and I know for very well that a lot of moves are being made to also enable that sector to attract the needed investment. We've seen executive orders and all of that from the presidency. But my question really would be, we saw 2 of the top heads of agencies resign yesterday, and of course we have new ones, new names sent to the Senate and all. I'm just worried. I don't know, do you think this could affect any of the activities of the sector? What do you make of this move? What's your reaction to it?
Well, I think at this point you must look at the antecedent of Mr. President, who cut his teeth in the corporate world from the oil and gas sector. So his depth of understanding, his grasp of the issues and the dynamics of that sector is unquestionable. And when about 7 months ago he eased out the leadership of the NNPC and brought in the Ojulari crew, that was a reset. Okay? Now, what happened yesterday, you must understand that decision did not happen in a vacuum. And nobody can claim victory here. The only person that can claim victory is Mr. President and Nigeria. Because what the president has done, and we must give him the benefit of the doubt, is to take that timely and critical decision. And we're also seeing how he has followed up almost immediately by sending the names of the replacements directly. The president sits atop volumes of files and reports. He monitors and gets briefed on what's happening in the sector. And when he thinks it is necessary, whether there's a spark or a fire, the president, with the better judgment, is able to pull the trigger. Now, what we've seen yesterday is a reset, pressing the hard button reset for the downstream sector. And I believe that, that transition that has occurred without any lapse will not bring any disruption whatsoever.
Almost finally now, we talked around manufacturers. Their figures are indeed looking better, but it takes me back to the Nigeria First policy, instituted again by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Now, I'm asking, how well are we following through with this? A lot of work being done by the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. You mentioned that earlier too. But are we leading from the front with regards to following the Nigeria First policy?
I think so. I think, we're trying to build a culture. And when you try to build a culture, it takes time. And I think a lot of credit goes to Mr. President, who decided to really stand in front of this Nigerian First policy. Now, what happens after that announcement and commitment is made very clearly, which he made, is for the relevant ministries and departments and agencies to pick it up. We've seen the Information Ministry also work on it repeatedly. So we're building a consciousness and a culture. And what have you seen? We've seen two major developments. We're seeing increasingly, we're moving from a consumption economy to a productive one. Because if you say Nigeria First, that means we produce certain goods and we export. That means whatever we produce, we also consume. We have seen trade surpluses already, the best in the last 10 years coming. So there's more focus on the productive capacity that is internal to our country. Of course, the fact that we have availability of Forex right now shows that there's a disemphasis in providing dollars to import stuff in, what you can naturally get in our country. So the Nigerian First policy it's a culture, and it's going to take time. And it's just less than a year. I believe that eventually we will see Nigerians put Nigeria first. You have the American First policy that emphasizes the centricism of everything American. And it's the same thing when you say Nigeria first. Whatever Nigeria can produce here, let's produce it, let's consume it, let's export it. So this administration is bringing about, just like you have a political culture, it takes time for people to imbibe democratic tenets. We have a Nigerian First policy, which I believe, beyond the government pushing it forward, every Nigerian, whether what you use in your schools, in your homes, in the inputs to your factories, you source them locally, that puts Nigeria first.
Finally, what would be your outlook for 2026? We've seen the likes of Mr. Bismarck Riwani saying that, well, we are out for a boom in 2026. What are you learning in regards to projections for 2026?
Like they say, the morning shows the day. And I know I've had Bismarck Riwani say, that we should be ready in 2026 for a bumper. And I think that he didn't say that in the vacuum, knowing that he is an economic expert and a critic. And I think what we're going to see as a forecast is that inflation will taper down. We're going to see inflation on foodstuff also come down, prices. We're going to see the impact of the stability that has been brought into the Nigerian economy. We're going to see increased investments in critical sectors and an expansion and growth that is necessary. But of course, what we will need most importantly is that handshake between the fiscal and monetary, because they must constantly monitor what is happening and take very timely and critical decisions. So I think 2026 will be a better year for Nigeria, and I'm sure as the president plans to deliver his budget speech tomorrow, I am optimistic that that budget speech will be beneficial and will have some great points that will propel Nigeria into a greater future.
Thank you so much for your time on the program. Compliments of the season. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in advance. I must wish you that. Thank you.
Tolu, compliments of the season. Thank you for having me.
All right then. Well, still